So, today I want to talk about Rainbow Six Siege because this was one of the best games of 2015. This was a return to mainstream tactical gaming, which, quite frankly, I had almost given up on existing in the AAA market at all. And when Siege was finally announced, I was hugely supportive. And for those who weren't aware, I was even one of the original star players who really endorsed this game.
You have to coordinate, and in the fact that it gives you an advantage over people that don't do that, that's what I want to start seeing in games. That's what this delivers. And the only thing I see that in the mainstream market is Rainbow Six Siege.
But that was in 2015. And the thing that I've been struggling with for years now is not that Rainbow Six Siege is suddenly now a bad game, but the simple reality that I struggle the most with now, and this is also becoming increasingly an issue with many games nowadays, is that Rainbow Six Siege is not the same game that I played and so heavily endorsed in 2015. To the point where that version of Siege you can't even play anymore. It doesn't even exist anywhere. And that's something I think we need to talk about because the Rainbow Six Siege that we play today isn't the same game that we all fell in love with 3 years ago. But before we talk about this any further, I want to take a few minutes to talk about this video's sponsor. And today's video is sponsored by myself.
For those of you who aren't completely aware, our community doesn't just make videos, but we also make video games. One of our most recent projects is a Unity prototype we call Warfare 1944, which is a low-poly tactical shooter, and we're currently in the process of remaking all of these models with our own team. And all the assets we create are available on our Sketchfab store. On this store, you can click on a weapon, look at every detail of it, and most importantly, if you like our work, you can also buy it straight from us and either use it in your own game, create designs with it, or maybe even 3D print a full life-sized replica of it to carry around the house. I don't care. It's your money.
But now that we've broken the ice on this entire Rainbow Six Siege situation, I want to get into specifics about the game Siege used to be when it was first released versus the game that we get to play today. When I first endorsed Siege so heavily, the features I wanted desperately from a mainstream game was something that was strategic and multiplayer, forcing players to work together in ways they never had before. But more importantly, I wanted something believable and realistic, and not even necessarily perfectly or prohibitively realistic, but something that engrossed you into the world of an intensive, suspenseful SWAT raid, along with everything that goes along with that, the planning, the critical executions, the feel when things go wrong, being adaptable versus being coordinated. I wanted something that encompassed all of that and all of that adrenaline into a single, clean, believable, and highly replayable package of multiplayer tactical gaming. And that's what Rainbow Six Siege fucking was. The release version of Siege was the ultimate SWAT versus terrorist experience in multiplayer. And from a AAA studio that looked beautiful, this was a godsend. And that's what got me so much on board. But something that never even occurred to me at the time, not even remotely, is the idea that Siege would continue changing that formula after its release. The formula that was just so great and so perfect and that attracted me to that entire franchise would be something that would be changed and continue changing even after the official release because this wasn't early access. This wasn't a beta. This was Rainbow Six Siege's main release. And when I was playing the game then, I never thought about the idea. I never even thought about the concept that everything about the game that made me love it so much was on the table of being changeable. And maybe even before we get deeper into this, I think there's a lot of people who play Siege now who have probably never played the original version of Siege. In fact, there's a whole new generation of gamers who might even think that this idea of me expecting a game on release to be at least a majority indicator of the final product that you were going to get after purchasing this game. Perhaps I'm just old school and I come from an era where the game that you purchased was primarily the game you were going to get. And there might be a little bit of post-launch support adding in a few new hot fixes or maybe even some features that are still in line with that original vision of the game that you purchased. But the concept that you can have an ongoing, evolving service style of game that has the potential to over time evolve into something that is completely different than what you came into. That concept at the time, at least for a game like this, was completely alien to me. So let's talk about the game that Rainbow Six Siege used to be. Let's talk about the specifics of the kind of gameplay that I used to love so much about Rainbow Six Siege when it was first released. The first and most primary thing about Siege when it first released was that it was much more simple. It was much more straightforward, and it was much more centered around the idea of SWAT versus terrorist in a traditional sense. The SWAT shields were much more of a centerpiece of the game. Suppressing fire, coordinating breaches, because there was only a few gadgets that acted as an accent to the base shooter mechanics of the game, instead of the gadgets being a centerpiece of all of the strategies, Rainbow Six Siege originally felt more like a tactical shooter with a few interesting mechanics and gadgets thrown in. And because of that, because this was primarily a tactical shooter with only a few additional gadgets and mechanics in the mix, those gadgets and mechanics had significantly more importance. You didn't have to worry about going into a room and wondering if somebody was going to hack your phone, or if you're shooting at somebody, maybe it's a hologram decoy gadget. It wasn't about that. This was primarily about SWAT shields and breaching charges and shotguns and rifles. That was what the original Rainbow Six Siege was all about. And it was fucking dope. And just the saddest thing about all of this isn't that Rainbow Six Siege is a bad game now. In fact, if anything, there's a whole new generation of people playing that game who love it. But the sad thing is that it's literally impossible to play that original game that, in my opinion, actually appealed to a completely different audience than the audience that plays Siege now. That original version of the game can't even be played anymore. So, overall, there's not much that can be done about this. There's no mod support. I don't think Ubisoft is going to change the game back to what it was. Frankly, I don't even think they would be open to making that original version of the game playable again. So there's really not much more we can do than be disappointed. Except for only one thing. There is one game that I am really excited about that might be able to return us to what Rainbow Six Siege was originally all about. And that game, I'm sure many of you already know, is the game Ready or Not. And Ready or Not is a serious, visceral tactical shooter that I think would possibly struggle more if Rainbow Six Siege in its original form was still around today. But since it is not, and there is again nothing like that on the market, I'm excited to see Ready or Not come out. I'm excited to play that game and hopefully have it fill that niche that now, for some reason, even though we had it, is again gone.
However, at the end of the day, as much as I am excited for Ready or Not, and as much as I am excited for other games in the future that might do this again, it is sad that we'll never have that original version of Rainbow Six Siege again. Because there are some things about the original version of Rainbow Six Siege that was just insanely unique. The destruction system alone, I foresee not being able to be redone in another engine for a game like that for a long time. Even games like Ready or Not won't have that scale or that detail of destruction in a SWAT versus terrorist match. And while I still don't really know how to feel about this or what to do about this, this is becoming an ongoing reality of games in the modern era that not enough people are talking about. You still have companies and organizations like IGN releasing review scores of games when they release, and I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to wonder if that's even relevant anymore. How can you release a review of Rainbow Six Siege that is still available today and have that judge whether you want to purchase the game in its current state when it is so fundamentally different than the product it was when it was first released and when it was first reviewed? I also see similar problems with games like Sea of Thieves and Fallout 76 and No Man's Sky. We're entering an era of video games where it's almost impossible to release a single release review of the game because the nature of game development is transforming not into creating a single packaged product, but game development is evolving into a live ongoing service, almost like a TV show or even like any other evolving franchise, like the bakery you went to when you were a kid and then you go back when you're an adult and it's just completely different. And that's not something to be mad about. That's just the reality of bakeries. They hire different people. It's a fundamentally different thing after a certain amount of time. And that's just not something I thought would happen to video games. And the strangest thing about video games is they are one of the only things that actually used to be that way. They used to be a single product. They used to be a packaged experience that you could purchase and run off with and experience for the rest of your life that you owned it. And now they're transforming into something completely different. And it's not necessarily bad, but it is different. And it's something that I think we should talk about more. Alright, well, that is it for today. If you enjoyed this video, then feel free to stick around. You can also support our projects and everything by joining and supporting our community, and there is a button for it beneath this video. In addition to that, if you are the kind of person who likes to get involved with everything that I do, then you can feel free to go check out some of my other projects, including my music that I create with my group on Spotify. Link is up here in the description. And if you are interested in getting some merchandise, you can pick up this Iron Armada t-shirt that our artist Lucas designed, which is pretty cool, and you can click the link also in the top right hand corner of this video and go pick yourself up some of those if you feel so inclined. But besides that, thanks so much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this is something that is not entirely depressing, but is more thought-provoking. It is something that I am somewhat disappointed about, but I do think it is also a new reality of video gaming, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is something to take into consideration. Alright, well, that is it for me. I will see you guys in the next video, and I love you. Cheers.
And now